What's good? What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Urban Platform Speaks. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel as you tune in to check out the content. And with that being said, man, I want to talk about a guy, man, who don't get as much credit as I think he should. That's this guy, Clyde Drexler. I remember watching Clyde Drexler when he played in college for the I think it's called the Houston Cougars. I know he played in Houston, with the Cougars, and he had man, who was on his team in college? He played with Hakeem Olajuwon in college. Who else? Larry Mishaw. They just man, that team right there, like the team that he played with in college, in my opinion, was like they it was like a NBA team. They was an NBA team. They just had that much talent on that team when they played in the you know, when he played in college. And I was always a big fan of Clyde, man, because this dude used to take off from it seemed like the free throw line, with his dunks, and he just used to glide to the basket, man. He'd be so high in the air, his knees being people face and stuff like that, man. Clyde was that dude, man. Right. Um, I think Clyde, they made it to maybe I don't he didn't win an NCAA championship. And that's because they played against they played the Georgetown Hoyas, man. You talking about that game was a good game. Who was it? Reggie Williams, Patrick Ewing, um, Michael Graham. Man, that Georgetown team again. Yeah, professionals on that team. So that was really good basketball back when Georgetown and Houston went at it. But back to Clyde, man. Clyde, when I'm watching Clyde in college, I knew when he got to the NBA, Clyde was going to be a really good pro. And so Clyde got drafted by the Portland Trail Blazers. I forgot what year he went. I think he went in the year before Michael Jordan. So it might have been 83, 82 or 83. Right. And Clyde was that dude. But I think that Clyde don't get enough credit because of Michael Jordan. Like Michael Jordan kind of overshadowed Clyde. But if you go back and you watch the highlights of what Clyde was doing to people, man, it was mean. And Clyde was a two-way basketball player. Like he played really good defense, and Clyde paid. He played. You know what he was on offense. Just look at the highlights, and that's what everybody. But Clyde, man, he would block your shot, steal the ball from you. Clyde was that dude. Now, Clyde didn't get the attention that Michael Jordan got. I think Clyde, he was more laid back. He was not as flamboyant and flashy as Mike. Clyde was just he'd take off uh and dunk on people, but he wasn't as flashy as Mike. Now, was his game as polished as Mike? I don't think like in the half court, I don't think his game was like Mike's, right? He was more of a slasher, but Clyde never like developed, in my opinion, a turnaround jumper or nothing like that. As far as his mid-range game was okay, but Clyde basically excelled on teams. Like he liked to get out and run and fill the lane and get dunks. And he could score in the half court because he had a decent jumper, but he wasn't in the half court. He wasn't like what Mike was. Like Mike had him in it, had the advantage over Clyde in the half court because Mike could, had that turnaround jumper. Mike had that low post game, whereas though Clyde, he had those, but not to the level of Mike. And but yeah, man, I think if it wasn't for Mike, though, I think that Clyde probably could have been the face of the league. Even when Mike talk about Clyde, Mike said that it could have been Clyde. It's just that Clyde was not. That wasn't what Clyde wanted. Clyde wanted to win and stuff like that, but Clyde kind of when it came to being out there, Clyde was laid back and he wanted to fade into just wanted to fade into the back. He didn't want all that publicity and stuff like that. So he didn't gravitate to stuff like that. Whereas though Mike gravitated to that spotlight, and in those brightest moments, Mike really stood out. Clyde, he stood out in those bright moments too, but he was like I said, he was more reserved and laid back, where Michael was flashy and flamboyant, and that made for, that made Mike so much more marketable. But I kind of compare Clyde game to Dr. J, like Julius Irving, you know. And if you think about like the kind of fame and notoriety that Julius Irving had when he was in the league, then if it wasn't for Mike, I think that's the same type of fame and notoriety that Clyde would have had. Clyde would have been just as big as what Dr. J was when Dr. J was in the league. When Dr. J first hit the NBA, he was then the face of the league, because of his style of play. And again, looking when I think about Clyde, Clyde was not even as flamboyant as Dr. J. He had some nice plays and stuff like that, but like they used to show Dr. J showing up to games and stuff in his outfits and with the full length furs and stuff and the big hats and stuff like that. And those what those they leisure suits, those cool little leisure suits that they used to wear. But Clyde, was never like that. Clyde, he'd do his do what he do on the court, and then that was that. So Clyde just faded into the background. But if it wasn't for Mike, man, this dude Clyde right here, people would be talking so much more differently about Clyde. And those matchups that Mike and Clyde had, in my opinion, there was some classic matchups when Mike didn't really. Mike had some, he got the best of Clyde a few times, but he ain't dominate like what people would think or what people said. Clyde went right back at him. Clyde blocked Mike's shots a couple times. Mike blocked Clyde's shots a couple times. They dunked on each other. They went back and forth. They went back and forth. Mike did edge him out, but it wasn't like Mike dominated Clyde. Mike was Clyde was a little bit taller than Mike. Clyde was like 6'7", Mike 6'6". As far as foot speed, Clyde was a little bit, Mike had him on foot speed. But as far as like who could jump the highest, I would give that to Clyde, in my opinion. Clyde, just like I said, Clyde could jump and was athletic enough to play Mike and athletic enough to affect. Mike had to respect Clyde's defense because Clyde would block his shot and was able to stay with Mike. So yeah, that was those. They had some epic battles, and like I said, Mike ain't dominate like what a lot of people thought he did, or like the media will want you to think he did. They went back and forth. They went back and forth. I wish, as a matter of fact, I wish that Mike didn't have to sit out that year, though. When the Houston Rockets was going to the championship, I wish that Mike didn't have to sit out those years, because that would have been a really Chicago and Houston for the championship. A lot of people said, well, people from Houston more so said that would have been Mike's toughest. That would have been Mike's toughest opponent, because you had Akeem Olajuwon and you had Clyde Drexler, you had Vernon Maxwell, Sam Cassell, Kenny Smith. That Houston team that won that repeated, I think it was in 92. It was what those years that Mike retired. I forgot the year that Mike retired, but those 2 years that Mike was out and the Houston Rockets repeated, they won those 2 championships. I just wish that Mike was in the league then. And so, because if Mike could have got past Hakeem Olajuwon and those guys, man, with Clyde Drexler, that would have been his, because other than that, every time Mike made it to the finals or on his way to the finals, like their championship was like going through New York or going through Indiana. For the most part, those teams that was coming out of West, Mike and them really, they made short work of them. They usually got them out of there like in 6 games when they went to the championship. Like nobody in the West was able to take Mike and the Chicago Bulls to a 7th game. I think that Clyde Drexler and the Houston Rockets would have been able to take Mike and them, at least to a 7th game. Like I said, because they had Clyde Drexler and they had Hakeem Olajuwon. Chicago didn't have anybody back in those days who could have dealt with Hakeem Olajuwon. So that would have been, yeah, they would have won 7 games. That, and as much as I am a Chicago Bulls fan, a Michael Jordan fan, I think one of those years, I think at least one of those years, I think the Houston Rockets would have been able to get Michael Jordan now and win one of those championships because Houston was just that good. And the Houston Rockets in the regular season had success against the Chicago Bulls. But while Mike was playing, they was never able to get out of the West, But when they play Chicago, they used to have success and beat Chicago a lot of times. So that would have been a good matchup for them. So yeah, but that's my take, man, on this guy, man. Clyde. Clyde was that dude. Clyde don't get enough. He don't get enough credit. So with that being said, man, y'all make sure to like, subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a comment, and I'll check you all out in the next video. Peace.